Hey everybody, I'm Pak MMA, and today I'll be breaking down probably my most highly anticipated fight on UFC Qatar of Ian Garry versus Belal Muhammad, obviously besides the great blob war of Sergey Spivak versus Shamil Gaziev. Just want to say before I go on, thank you guys so much for the support on the last video. It really blew up relative to a channel of my size and being so new, so once again, thank you so much for the support, and I'm going to continue to grind and keep up that momentum, you know? Alright, so what are the biggest strengths of Ian Machado Garry here versus Belal Muhammad? Garry, for starters, has a sizable frame advantage over Belal in this matchup with a 74.5 reach over Belal's 72, along with being listed as 6'3 over Belal's 5'11. This is pretty important when seeing that Garry has a significant speed advantage along with pretty high-level distance management as seen in the Pratis fight. Ian's rear kicks are also very nasty from distance. We saw this right high kick constantly threatening Pratis and keeping his left hand up, and pretty much neutralizing it as a weapon in that fight until the 5th round. He also obviously knocked out D-Rod with this high kick, setting it up very well in that fight. Another strike I want to mention that Ian has in his bag is his lead uppercut. Against Pratis, he was constantly retreating and evading Garry's combinations by using the long guard, which is pretty effective considering how freakishly lanky Carlos is, but Garry adjusts pretty well by the 3rd round when he starts implementing this sneaky lead uppercut just under Carlos's lead arm, which caught him a multitude of times. And I think this will be very potent against Belal because Belal has fairly awkward defensive tendencies, often pulling away and parrying most of the time. I think the combination of Ian's kicks and his ability to cut through his opponent's guard will be a massive tool for him in this fight. Garry also has some really great defensive instincts. This especially was shown in the Pratis fight for the most part, where he's improved greatly from just getting blitzed by right hands by guys like MVP and even Shavkat. But to be fair, this could also just be that Ian is way better from open stance than close stance, but I think the defensive improvements he showed in that fight are likely to translate here versus Belal. Garry has some pretty notable weaknesses. For one, his offensive wrestling instincts are just kind of bad. It's pretty clear he's a striker who tries to grapple. Technique-wise, he's just not super proficient overall. Garry doesn't have the greatest takedown defense. Most of his avoidance for takedowns just comes from his ability to manage space. He got taken down by Shavkat twice, I believe, from space, but in the clinch, Ian's defense looks pretty solid, at least versus Shavkat. Versus Shavkat, Garry was pretty prone to pressure and didn't press forward nearly as much as he did versus Pratis. Granted, he did have a clearer game plan versus Pratis, but still he does seem susceptible to being pressured. I'm going to keep it light here, so moving on to Belal. His biggest strength here is obviously his ability to pressure. Belal has had success pressuring guys like Leon, Burns, and even JDM to an extent, and the reason that this is a strength is because Belal is great at mixing it up, using his Canelo hands to keep his opponents defensively responsible while shooting when their back is close to the cage. I'd say that until the JDM fight, he's shown good game planning and decent fight IQ, but he definitely hit a roadblock with JDM. I think his weaknesses tend to also be his strengths. Like, Belal is great at mixing it up, but sometimes he tends to be an ego fighter, being a little too keen to stay on his feet at times. This was certainly shown versus JDM, and his pressure can also be reckless and a bit aimless, getting caught by counter shots from longer, rangier fighters. And like I mentioned before, he has some basic and awkward defensive tendencies that will certainly play a factor in this fight. To compare how these strengths and weaknesses stack up, I think Garry has shown solid takedown defense up against the cage. It's more so the shots in the open right before the cage wall that he seems to struggle defending. Garry can also fight with his ego, but I'd also consider him a generally smarter and more disciplined game planner than Belal. I think Garry can struggle straight up boxing with Belal, but those struggles for Garry were primarily against fighters who were much taller than Belal and closer to Garry's height. I think if Belal were to win this fight, he needs to threaten takedowns from space more, which he just typically doesn't do. Belal is a very physical and bullying fighter, but I just see Garry being faster, longer, and way harder to get to compared to most of Belal's other opponents. We can even see this in a common opponent in Carlos Pratis, where Garry, just on 3 weeks' notice, does a phenomenal job at keeping distance and fighting the lead hand in open space, constantly evading and keeping Carlos's left hand busy, while still landing at a decently high clip. Unlike Leon, one of Belal's opponents, who didn't really throw a ton of volume, was trying to go strike for strike with Pratis and showed his defensive deficiencies in orthodox and gets caught by a huge left hand from Pratis and gets knocked out. I mainly point this out because it outlines the differences in skill defensively between Leon and Garry, in which Garry is soon to be Belal's next opponent. If I were to give a prediction, I can see a late finish for Garry, perhaps a head kick or that lead uppercut if he manages to have a ton of success on the feet, but I think in all likelihood it will be a boring decision that Belal makes pretty competitive, but Garry edges it out. It's hard to trust Belal's blind baseline pressure when he just got pretty mangled and punished by JDM in his last fight. I want to pick Belal because I am a big fan of his, but he's seemingly showing his age, and I think he was just at the right place and the right time fighting a guy as prone to pressure as Leon. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed my breakdown. Is there anything I missed? Please comment it down below, and if you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to Pac MMA. See you guys.